We'll begin. I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Secretary Burgess, are there any changes to the final agenda?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. There are no changes to this morning's agenda.
Thank you. So we'll move to the first item for discussion, Item 101, Case 17G0606, as it relates to the petition filed by Consolidated Edison for approval of its Smart Solutions Program, presented by Mike Reeder, Chief Gas and Water Rates and Supply, and Peggy Neville, Deputy Director, Office of Clean Energy. Cindy McCarron, Deputy Director of Gas and Water, Rob Cully, Utility Engineering Specialist 3, and John Favreau, Assistant Counsel, are available for questions. Mike, please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. On September 29th, 2017, Consolidated Edison Company of New York filed a petition for approval of its Smart Solutions for Natural Gas Customers program. In its 2017 petition, Con Edison proposed to implement a multi-pronged program to address its forecasted growing natural gas demand. Specifically, the company proposed an enhanced gas energy efficiency program, a gas innovation program, a gas demand response pilot, a non-pipe alternative, or NPA, portfolio, and recovery of pipeline development costs. In its July and August 2018 orders, the Commission made determinations regarding the company's proposals related to the Enhanced Energy Efficiency Program, pipeline development costs, and the gas demand response pilot. The draft order before you does not revisit those issues. In addition, Con Edison has recently filed additional information related to its proposed gas innovation program, which is currently subject to public comment and therefore is not being considered at this time. On December 28, 2018, Con Edison filed additional detail regarding its proposed NPA portfolio and shareholder incentive mechanism. In the draft order before you, it is recommended that the Commission approve, with modification, Con Edison's proposed NPA portfolio. Con Edison underwent a request for proposal, or RFP, process to develop its proposed NPA portfolio. After review and proper vetting of the proposals received, Con Edison requests that the Commission approve a $305 million budget, excluding commodity and capacity charges and O&M costs, for a portfolio of non-pipeline projects including 1. Gas energy efficiency programs, including efforts targeting low-income customers and government buildings that provide critical community services. 2. Renewable thermal electrification by way of residential geothermal heat pumps in Westchester County and air source heat pumps for multifamily customers in the Bronx. 3. Renewable natural gas production plants in Westchester County and New York City. And 4. Trucked supplies of compressed natural gas and liquefied natural gas in Westchester County. The company has taken a positive step by proposing non-traditional solutions to present and future gas supply constraint problems, and commenting parties have made a valuable contribution in recommending qualifications to the proposal in light of the state's clean energy policies. The measures approved in this order are not a short-term fix to a short-term problem. They are the early stages of a long-term, comprehensive approach. The company is encouraged to work closely with stakeholders and local government officials as this effort continues. The item before you does not grant Con Edison's request for a shareholder incentive mechanism, mirroring those put in place for non-wires alternatives, for the reasons we will discuss in more detail. However, the item notes where a gas company does have a specific infrastructure project within the company's control that can be avoided, a non-wires alternative-like mechanism may be appropriate. Because the company's gas business faces a different set of long-term challenges than does its electric business, the company is encouraged to propose a more comprehensive and gas-specific approach to incentives for supply constraint solutions. The supply-side projects contained in the company's NPA portfolio include renewable, compressed, and liquefied natural gas projects that would provide 47.1 million decatherms of peak day supply capability, which accounts for just over half of the relief contained in the portfolio. The proposed budget for the supply side solutions is $86.9 million, which consists of $82.6 million in capital costs, $1.4 million in supply side program administrative costs for internal labor, and $2.9 million for other related O&M costs. However, Con Edison currently has existing compressed and liquefied natural gas injection facilities connected to its gas network, providing gas supply during winter peak day events. Because the proposed supply side projects fit within the company's current gas supply and capital planning scope, it is recommended that Con Edison be directed to begin development of these projects now with appropriate engagement with local affected communities. Furthermore, it is recommended that Con Edison's request for cost recovery and rate treatment associated with the supply side solutions be denied, and instead, the solutions be included as projects within the company's existing capital program and included in the company's current pending rate filing. It has been the policy of the Commission to encourage non-traditional customer-side solutions where they are cost-effective and to align utility financial incentives with these outcomes. In this instance, the supply-side measures proposed by the company represent a conventional approach to supply shortages and do not warrant any additional financial incentive. The company is exercising its responsibility to maintain reliable service, and costs for those measures should be recovered conventionally under the company's rate plan or through the gas adjustment clause mechanism as appropriate and defined by regulations. The company should pursue these solutions in the interest of serving its customers, and in doing so, should work with those customers and affected communities to pursue solutions that consider their needs. Peggy will now speak to the demand side solutions.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. The company has included in the proposed NPA portfolio $227.5 million in demand-side solutions, estimated to achieve 37.5 million decatherms of peak day relief by 2024. This figure includes $222.6 million in incentive and non-labor admin costs, as well as $4.8 million in administrative costs for internal labor. These solutions resulted from the RFP process mentioned earlier and consist of natural gas energy efficiency and heating electrification, or in other words, installation of heat pumps. The draft item before you recommends approving the company's proposal to implement the demand-side solutions with modification. In its December 13, 2018 order adopting accelerated energy efficiency targets in case 18M0084, which I will refer to as the accelerated EE order, the Commission expressed support for both energy efficiency and heat pump installations. This was evidenced by the adoption of an incremental energy efficiency goal for the state's large investor-owned utilities of 31 trillion BTU, or TBTU, with a sub-target of at least 5 TBTU for heat pump installations by 2025. The accelerated EE order also established a process for the state's utilities to jointly file a proposal by March 31, 2019, which would propose a distribution of the statewide goal and associated costs by utility and by fuel type. This proposal is anticipated to be acted upon by the Commission in the latter part of 2019. All commenters were supportive of the demand-side solutions included in Con Edison's petition. However, some raised questions as to how these activities would complement or potentially compete with current or future energy efficiency initiatives. While the company's current petition is focused on pursuing alternatives to peak day supply constraints, the demand-side solutions proposed are wholly consistent with the goals set forth in the accelerated EE order and therefore need to be viewed within that context. The primary distinction between what is under consideration here and what is required from the accelerated EE order is one of timing. Given the process the company has undertaken to solicit actionable proposals from the marketplace, coupled with the need to develop solutions for supply-constrained areas, staff believes it is not advisable to unnecessarily delay this increased level of energy efficiency and heat pump installation while the process established in the accelerated EE order runs its course. Rather, the recommendation before you allows Con Edison to begin to address the unique needs of its territory while jump-starting implementation towards the overall goals established in the accelerated EE order. Staff recommends approval of $222.6 million for the implementation of the demand-side solutions. Cost recovery, as well as consideration of any additional internal labor costs, are to be considered within the pending rate proceeding. Beyond the 37.5 million decatherms of peak day relief previously mentioned, the demand-side solutions are estimated to achieve approximately 4.1 TB of cumulative annual natural gas savings by 2024. The company is directed to begin implementation immediately and include the targets and budgets approved in this item within the upcoming joint utility filing in March. With regard to shareholder incentives, the demand-side solutions proposed by the company do represent non-traditional solutions for which shareholder incentives may be warranted. However, because energy efficiency and heat pump programs are eligible for earning adjustment mechanisms, or EAMs, as outlined in the accelerated EE order, these components are more appropriately considered as part of the company's comprehensive energy efficiency offerings. Thank you. We are available for any questions you may have.
Thank you for the presentation and the work that you provided here. I find it careful, well thought through and responsive. And it looks to Con Ed to move forward with these important solutions in the interest of serving the customers both on the demand and the supply side. I find that it's timely, and I find that your recommendation is balanced and prudent as to budget and incentives in matters of that type. So I will be in favor of this item. Now, did folks hear me? I'm sorry, I wasn't on. I'm good.
This item represents solid movement toward the implementation of a new way of utility planning consistent with REV, to look at non-pipes alternatives as we do with non-wires alternatives on the electric side, with RFPs and non-traditional alternatives being considered both on the supply side and the demand side. These programs are innovative, but I recognize that they don't address all of the gas supply issues downstate. They are, however, a step in the right direction, and I support the order.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. May come as no surprise that I do have a little something to say on this issue. I hope to be thoughtful and to focus on the path forward. We are at a critical juncture. While we are looking at the Smart Solutions program and the filing before us, and we've dealt with a number of different items in this proceeding, and the moratorium itself is not before us to evaluate today. It is filed in this proceeding, and it is mentioned in the draft order, and is a significant aspect of this proceeding, but it's not unique to Con Ed. Just happens to be the one that has generated the most reaction so far. But it's also not the first moratorium that New York is facing or has faced. In the 1970s, we dealt with looking at statewide moratorium. That order is that dealt with that was is eye-opening and scary, and I hope to not have to be in that position. But unfortunately, that is something that if we don't address sooner rather than later, we are going to be looking at that, and that is not something that we should be addressing. Moratoriums should not be the answer and should not be seen as a good thing, regardless of where you sit on the issue. It is not something we should want, temporary or permanent. Lansing also had a moratorium, NYSEG Lansing, and that is instructive for me as it relates to the non-pipes alternatives. Part of that, while that didn't come before us, non-pipes alternatives and what's happening in that area will be something that will come before us for resolution on. As way of background, we did address in the NYSEG area We did address allowing an order to allow a compressor station and looking at also going forward with reliability issues, going forward with trying to address letting NYSEG put out an RFP for the non-pipes alternatives as a way of getting around having to have a pipeline. But we did recognize at that time that it may have to come back to us for a pipeline if they were not able to address through the non-pipes alternatives and the other issues that they were dealing with, the need for addressing their energy needs there in a economic and environmentally friendly way because of the serious reliability issues. They're still ongoing. I don't want to prejudge what's happening there, but it is still a significant challenge. They have not had success so far, and it is something that I know I'm watching and the staff is watching. The community is very invested in it, as well as the company. But it is a lesson for us is that has a significant timeline issue, and we don't have time for worrying about our reliability issues. We need to address them real time. We need to really take careful stock of that because it isn't an easy fix. Just saying no to a pipeline doesn't necessarily end the issues. It's an ongoing challenge. There's a lot that goes on to plan and to make sure that a community has what it needs for its energy needs and doesn't put at risk the system. With that, I do want to recognize that, again, from a historical perspective, back in 2012, there was a natural gas expansion proceeding that's still ongoing. I would say ongoing. There hasn't been any activity in it since 2013. Anytime anyone was asked if it's dormant, the response is it's not dormant, even though it is. There has been no activity. We have dealt with the issues through other proceedings. We've dealt with some of the natural gas expansion issues in other rate cases. And so if we were formally asked, the response was that it is proceeding through other means, and you could point to that. And we've actually had some successes, especially in our neighborhood expansion programs that we've supported in looking at that. And so I do point to that sort of as instructive in terms of our policy goals and our policy objectives and what we do to help signal to companies and to the customers and to those stakeholders in that our policies do generate activities and reactions to that. And so signaling what we're doing in terms of just as short a time ago as 2012, and actually interesting in the natural gas expansion case, the first filing in that was the November 27th, 2012 press release on the Governor's Energy Highway gaining momentum. And then it continued with our order instituting, I wasn't there at the time, order instituting the proceeding to examine the expansion of natural gas. And then opening up a technical conference and presentations for technical conference were posted. Going through that, there was actually an interesting PowerPoint from Con Ed looking at the Westchester Gas Service requests in there. And in 2011, traditional new business and the oil to gas conversions. And it showed that approximately 800 services were installed in 2011 and 2012. This was also in light of focus in New York City as well. New York City put in a presentation on its clean heat program back in January 9th, 2013. Their presentation focused on the fact that the need to eliminate heavy oil and eliminating number 6 heating oil was one of the number one strategies to make New York City's air the cleanest of any major U.S. city. We should be very proud of that. And the city and EDF launched the New York City Clean Heat to accelerate that. And so we were very focused in, as a state, also supporting that. There were over 13,000 conversions were completed since that program started, which eliminated 154. This was back in 2013, beginning of 2013, eliminated 154 metric tons, PM 2.5, or 40% of the program's goals. And the demand for natural gas also was recognized at that time. This is again from the PowerPoint from New York City. Requests for natural gas service to Con Edison increased fivefold after the city released its regulations phasing out number 6 oil. The conversions from number 6 oil to natural gas can achieve financial payback, especially when paired with energy efficiency, and then it went on and on. So from my perspective, what I sort of took away from that is the focus of it is really important that we focus on how can we reduce emissions, how can we work to get cleaner energy, and the policies that we do really have to be aligned with working with all stakeholders. And seeing it, especially seeing how we started the proceeding that actually led to the oil to gas conversions, that actually focused at that time, and there's a lot of documentation in here, including our order, which recognized the need to look at enhancing reliability, economic development, what that would mean for load growth, et cetera. That there was a recognition that this would increase the load growth, and that there would be a need to look at that and what that would mean, whether it was for reinforcements, extensions, as well as potentially new pipes. And so those are things that we, I think, have to take stock of. So while we can say that this is now coming from the moratorium, it is not new to us, nor should it be new to us or a shock to us that there would be increased demand. There has been. EIA Outlook has been forecasting this. Its most recent outlook has been doing that. Forecasting both nationally as well as state forecasts have showcased that. When even under the Clean Power Plan would have showed that there would be an increased need for this. It goes hand in hand, and we need to work very closely together to get to our renewables that we want to increase. We need to also work through this transition. And I think that that's really incumbent upon us as regulators to make sure we do that in a way that is helpful and not pointing fingers when we see that there is some disruption to that, but really trying to work together in a helpful way. So that's the history. Now we come to the current, where we talked about the proceeding. There are the related proceedings. There's still some ongoing proceedings. I do recognize that some of the draft order here is looking to other orders that will address it. We have the gas innovations piece of this that still will come before us. We have the petition for rehearing. Excuse me, I need some water. Thanks, if you can open this. We have. Oh, thank you. All right. Thank you. We have the petition for rehearing on the original order in the Smart Solutions that will have to come before us. And then we also have other proceedings that will interconnect. But the elephant in the room really is that we need to make some real-time decisions, and we really need to take care of that in a way that sends some clear signals about what exactly we are looking at from a policy perspective, rather than just leaving things hanging out there. I am very concerned, and as I said, we have been warned about the gas supply constraints for some time now. I think historically I outlined that. Again, Con Ed filed its original Smart Solutions petition in September 2017, stating its projections to have a 22% shortfall in supply capacity by 2023-2024. Supply is not the issue. We have supply. It's getting that. The constraints to get that is the issue. It's not lost on us that that's the issue. It's not just market conditions. It's policy conditions as well that are leaving that problematic, and unclear policy in what that is leaving that, and uncertainty in what that is leaving that to be unclear to those folks who may want to come because they need to have some certainty for knowing that there is a pathway here. Not only is it for their own need to know that, but it is the right thing to do. They have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders as well. As I said, NYSEG filed its petition to install compressors in the Lansing area in July of 2017, which was followed up this year with the issuance on RFP for non-pipeline alternatives to address the reliability needs caused by the increased demand for gas. More recently, National Grid filed tariff revisions in all 3 of its gas service territories to allow for more flexibility in connecting the gas customer, because in some areas they just don't have the capacity needed to serve new customers. As demand grows from existing customers without any increase in supply, the potential for moratoriums on new gas customers is a stark reality. And as we saw with Con Ed's recent issuance of a moratorium for most of Westchester County. Utilities are obligated to provide safe and reliable service to their existing customers. In a service territory, we also need to look at what about those, if they're not existing customers, but they are new customers? What's the obligation there? How do we work through that? What's the obligation of us as regulators to make sure that those customers in that service territory, or those potential customers, have what they need for their energy needs? That's our obligation. That's on us. We need to make sure that the power is there and the structure is there. That's on us. If the utilities are telling us that they can't provide that, it's irresponsible of them to accept new customers if they've determined there's inadequate supply. It's irresponsible of them to accept new customers if they're determined there's inadequate supply to maintain a system pressure on the coldest peak day. They've come to us, they've told us they can't do it, it would be irresponsible. We are determined, or we are looking at, that is true. If that's true, then they need to do the moratorium, temporary moratorium. We can't penalize them for that. We need to look at then us and what are we doing, knowing that this was coming, and looking at that from the perspective of, if there is an issue and we're looking at that, what's the next step that we need to do? So it's about looking and planning so that we don't have any more temporary moratoriums and we don't have any permanent moratoriums, and addressing the issue, whatever that is. It does not mean that the solution is that everything goes to gas. It may mean that there are more opportunities for other energy sources. But we need to look at that and we need to plan for it, because it doesn't happen overnight. Even here in this order, it doesn't go far enough, because we are now looking and we have to rely on going to local permitting. Now, traditionally, it should not be that difficult, but it may take a while with local permitting. And with that, we still have a crisis in that we have a temporary moratorium. And so we need to look at, in the interim, what do we do with those customers or those potential customers who aren't able to access the energy that they need? Or if they are able to access energy, it is too cost prohibitive for them, are just not able to be sufficient for them, or they have to wait. That may not be acceptable. It produces other issues, economic issues. Large customers may decide to abandon their projects altogether. That has a negative impact on economic development. It's not just about that large business customer deciding not to come or build there. It's about those employees that may come and buy a home there or rent there. It's about those other businesses around there that may benefit from those folks who would live there. So these are the ripple effects from the decision for us to not be able to plan out and have foreseen this. Again, the picture is back in 2012, 2013, we were projecting this increase. We should be looking at the numbers. If the increases were every year, this projection of increased customer demand, then we needed to be able to do the forecasting. Now, this gets to the larger issue for me, and one that I've spoken on quite a bit. In 2009, State Energy Planning Article 6 was adopted, State Energy Planning Law. At that time, every 4 years, it said, every 4 years, the State Energy Planning Board shall adopt a state energy plan which addresses each item identified. And it's a long list, so I won't read it for you. And the board may adopt such a plan more frequently for good cause shown. The board shall prepare biannual reports every second year following the issuance of the final state energy plan, including a discussion and evaluation of the ability of the state and private markets to implement the policies, programs, and other recommendations as found in the state energy plan, and recommendations for new or amended policies as needed to continue successful movement toward implementation and realization of such policies and programs. Then it goes on. Right now, the State Energy Planning Board is out of compliance with the law and has been out of compliance for a long time. The last State Energy Planning Board report should have been in 2013. It was late by 2 years in 2015. That doesn't mean that it should have then got a pass for another 4 years to 2019. It actually should have then still remained in compliance to 2017 and gotten back into compliance with the 4-year cycle. However, if you wanted to keep it to 2019, at the very least in 2017, they should have issued every second year following the issuance of the final report, they should have issued prepared a biannual report. So we should have seen something then. They believe we did see some stuff. Then 2019 is when we should have seen an actual report, but we should have seen in 2018 a draft. I understand there is discussion on working with the State Energy Planning Board, but we should already have been in that. We should already have information. And for me, it's something I've spoken about publicly quite a bit. It is important for us. The technical advisor to the State Energy Planning Board is not NYSERDA, it is not DPS, it is not NYPA, it is not DEC, it is the ISO. That's the technical advisor to it. While other state agencies, including DPS, are part of the working with them under the law to give them information and plan with them, it is actually the technical advisor is the New York ISO. So for me, I just think it's really important that we focus on this because while that is a separate, longer-term state energy planning, we do at the Commission have our real-time needs now and the critical crunch that we have to also do. And while I understand that we'll be studying this to investigate the market conditions, it goes beyond that. It goes into looking really at what we're doing to ensure safe and reliable and adequate service, ensuring that there's at cost effective price point. So I really am very focused on making sure that we're doing what we need to do in real time and not just waiting for a report to come out in July 2019. I also do not think that it should be that the staff is the one, the staff is given the job of the report. I do think it should be, an independent entity, or an independent consultant, much like we do with our audit processes, where the commission itself can weigh in on it and also approve it, so that we can have that process in place so that it truly is authentic and weighs into all the different issues. And it also is, I think, too cumbersome and too important to give to staff to have to do in short term. So it's just my food for thought on that. With the moratorium and what led to this, which is one of the things that staff will be looking at, there is no approval process for a moratorium. They do come to the staff. They do get sort of, my understanding is there is some recognition that, yes, we believe that there is a need for a temporary moratorium. Am I correct on that? And that there is an analysis done. But there is no real formal standard or process. Right. I do think that that is a fail, because I do think that we should have some processes in place so that we can make sure that the commission itself weighs in on that, and also maybe is able to look at what are we doing to make sure that the moratorium doesn't happen, but also what the parameters are with the moratorium. The thing that concerns me pretty much, one of the things that concerns me, all of it concerns me, but one of the things that concerns me is the March 15th deadline. Right now there's a race to get in and meet that March 15th deadline. I'm unclear, not from Westchester, I don't live in Westchester, so I'm unclear on the information that's being given to those in Westchester or those seeking to come to Westchester, on how to give that notice. I think that we should be very cognizant of the fact that it's stated as a temporary moratorium. So if it's truly temporary, there should be no need for a deadline. And I'd like to explore that a little bit, because as I see it, I don't really understand, and help me here, because I'm looking at this saying, you're telling me that if we don't get in after this deadline, there's no gas until we deal with this issue, and now we can lift the moratorium. But we don't know when we're going to be able to lift that moratorium. So get in before March 15th. If you're in March 15th, you'll be in this queue, but we don't know when we're going to be able to take you. And we don't necessarily know when we're going to be able to make those pronouncements. But so for me, we should be, as regulators, coming and very quickly, and this should have already been done, with the process to make sure that it's seamless. One, getting the word out to everyone, making sure it's very easy to get notice and be part of that, so that anyone, even if they just say, hey, I think I may want it, please put me down, come to me, let's talk, because they might not know. They maybe want gas, maybe they want something else, maybe they want to look at what the facts are, maybe they want to be able to explore this. We should have as big a queue as possible to know what our demand needs are, our potential demand needs are, and then whittle it down from there. Yes, it's on the company, but it's on us, because we're the ones that said yes to understanding that they were going to be saying that there was a need for filing the temporary moratorium. So I just really think this March 15th deadline is concerning to me, because it doesn't make sense to me. Now, again, I go back to Con Ed is doing the right thing in that they can't put at risk the reliability of the system, so they can't serve if it's going to cause a problem. But we should have already been figuring that out before we got to this, and figuring out how to get the word out so it wasn't just popped or felt like it was popped to people. So that's just something for consideration, because it is really important, and nobody should feel like March 16th they found out and then they're out of luck. And at the same time, when we're looking at this, what are the projections for if we do the Smart Solutions program, and if all of these things come into fruition, how much of this helps the Westchester pocket that's still going to be in need? Is there still going to be a problem?
Yeah, even if it's hard to say because we don't have the information on the innovation program yet. But with the DR program, with the enhanced energy efficiency, and with what's before you today in the NPA solutions, it's unlikely that the company will be able to lift the moratorium if all these solutions do come to fruition.
It's hard to say.
It's unlikely that they'll be able to lift the moratorium.
It's unlikely that they're able to lift the moratorium even if all of these come to fruition. That's pretty startling, and that is troubling, because that's what we should be focusing on. Not surprising, especially if you look at some of my past comments at sessions since 2013. But I do think that what we have heard is that the alternatives, we're going to be able to address this. If we're hearing that there's still going to be a moratorium, we should know what that is, and we should be addressing, because it's not like you can take care of this overnight. So we should already be knowing, what that scenario may be, and addressing that and making some projections rather than wait. Okay, I've spoken on that, so I don't need to repeat myself. I know I have, so I apologize. I just want to underscore the importance of this, and folks hearing the non-pipes alternatives are not, and smart solutions are not going to address 100% the issues. And so we need to understand that. And the non-pipes alternatives are not all going to be satisfactory to those folks who want 100% renewables. Because the non-pipes alternatives don't just have that in there. So.
Commissioner, may I?
Yes.
Mike, but this is not the last round of solutions that we're looking for. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've, in the order before you, we've directed Con Edison to continue to look for other non-pipe solutions and other alternatives within the context of the Accelerated Energy Efficiency Order.
So I think it's a partial response to your concern, Commissioner, that we're not stopping and we're not looking to Con Ed to stop.
Right. I take that. I note that. Okay. I do think, though, that underscoring that even if Con Ed succeeds, while we're still asking them to do more, and they get the full benefits from this non-pipes alternative portfolio, they're not going to be able to materially reduce and lift the moratorium in full. So the risk of an expanded moratorium, not just in Westchester, is real. Am I correct in that?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay. The item also speaks to using energy efficiency and heat pumps as part of the solution. I do support these types of initiatives as they may be part of the answer, but we have to really look at them from a cost-effective perspective and also where they're being utilized. We are looking at them in other scenarios. They will not address the problem alone. Under the scenario of customers facing moratoriums or fear of future supply constraints, when faced with the decision of how to heat their homes or their buildings or operate their business processes, folks may opt for lower cost energy solutions such as oil or propane. And compared to heat pumps or electricity. We need to recognize that. We also need to look at the environmental footprint and the environmental and unintended consequences that happen with this moratorium as well. And also be looking at the stark reality of the number of customers, potential customers who do not benefit from, this moratorium, or who drastically are affected by this moratorium because of each year the increase that we've seen from the demand. I'm not against many of the specifics in this item. In fact, I welcome some of them, and I appreciate staff, the company, and the party's efforts and contributions. It just doesn't go far enough in supplying the in addressing the issues that we have. It just doesn't. Not in Westchester, not in New York City, and certainly not statewide. Overall, we need to address it. We need, as I said before, a clear, comprehensive, fair, unbiased statewide strategy and policy for natural gas. And that strategy must recognize that many New York customers are choosing and demanding natural gas, and even doing so while being, constrained by some of our own decisions that seems to suggest that they don't want gas or focused on other things. This demand has to be met with sufficient access to supply. Again, it's not about not having supply, it's about the access to that supply. It's that simple. We have to really have a clear pathway on our goals with renewables and how natural gas fits or doesn't fit in making it a reality. We desperately need a comprehensive energy plan that recognizes the urgency of the situation and seriously lays out a plan to ensure that we not only meet our clean energy goals and our emission reduction targets, but also our goal to attract businesses, create jobs for New York, while carrying out a responsibility for providing safe and reliable service to New Yorkers. I do believe we can do all of that. We can't put at risk reliability and resiliency, and we can't keep trying to pretend that it's all good. It can be all good. Should be all good. We can work together. I do believe that there are solutions. I do believe, just like back in January of 2013, when Mayor Bloomberg worked with EDF and Con Ed and the state on programs that were focused on that, I do think that we can do it again, and I do think that we should. And I hope that we can focus on that real time. One question I do have relates to this order and the next steps. So we're looking at how some of this goes into looking for the rate, goes into the rate case, some of these issues, as to working with other proceedings, et cetera. But to the extent that, and there'll be a hearing, a public statement hearing, and staff will have investigation, I do hope that we have an independent consultant from an RFP that's issued, just like we do with auditors in some fashion, even if it's streamlined, to get it out on a timely basis, and comes to the commission as a body. But one of the questions that I do have is, in the course of all this, while we're monitoring all this, what happens if the crisis continues? How does it come back to the commission? How do we look at it? How do we monitor? I know staff will be working closely with Con Ed. I know staff is working with National Grid. How do we make sure that not just, okay, don't worry, Commissioner Berman, I'll talk to you, or you can talk to, the chair. Like, how do we actually make sure, like, we're looking at this order, how do we make sure that the commission, in carrying out its duty, is actually looking at this and making some decision points? Because again, I'm looking at that 1970s order and recognizing that was a crisis. That order was not good for that order in having to do that. That was the statewide, there's no gas, we got to make some decisions here. I'm now looking at, before we get to the crisis, what are we doing? How are we coming to those decisions? I don't know that we have the answers, but that's something that I recognize, and that's something that I'd like us to do.
Understood.
Okay.
Understood and noted. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you could read my mind too. I have no more questions. I will be concurring in part and dissenting in part. As I said, I do appreciate much of what's in this order. I do have some concerns. I do think that we are needing to have much more conversation at the front end, and I think we're in critical juncture, and we need to take this really much more seriously in the commission as a whole.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your good work. Thanks for your follow-up emails, too, by the way. I can support this as a workable approach, comprehensive look with focus on the demand and supply side efforts. It just moves us in the right direction, and I support the recommendation.
Thank you very much. So with that, I will move to call for a vote. My own vote is in favor of the recommendation to approve the petition with modifications as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I concur in part and dissent in part.
Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Aye.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. Thank you all. The second item for discussion is item 102, cases 16G0058 et al., as they relate to the report filed by the Brooklyn Union Gas Company and Keyspan Gas East Corporation regarding policies for temperature-controlled and interruptible customers, presented by Eric Ryder, Utility Supervisor, Gas and Water Rates and Supply Section. Cindy McMahon, Deputy Director for Gas and Water, Mike Reeder, Chief for Gas and Water Rates and Supply, and Brandon Goodrich, Assistant Counsel, are available for questions. Eric, please begin.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Item number 102 before you today is a draft order for the Brooklyn Union Gas Company doing business as National Grid New York, or KEDNY, and Keyspan Gas East Corporation doing business as National Grid, or KEDLI, collectively National Grid, or the companies. On September 17, 2018, the companies filed a report regarding the policies for temperature-controlled, or TC, and interruptible transportation, or IT, customers. The companies put forth a number of recommendations in the report, including certain changes to the company's tariffs and gas transportation operation procedures, or GTOP, manuals. The companies also propose in the report to modify the provision of their respective tariffs that allows them to impose penalties for the unauthorized use of gas by TC and IT customers. The draft order recommends the Commission approve the proposal to modify the tariff penalty provisions. The draft order also recommends directing the companies to file proposed tariff revisions to create a new non-firm service class for each service territory, file tariff revisions that propose solutions that address interruptible reliability, and require the companies to file tariff revisions to allow resumption of adding new TC customers. In National Grid's last downstate rate cases, the Commission required the companies to convene a collaborative to consider IT and TC service issues and subsequently file a report. The collaborative was to examine the structure and pricing of the company's interruptible service offerings, considering demand for natural gas and alternative fuel market dynamics. The rate order also required the companies to stop adding new TC customers. On September 17, 2018, National Grid filed a report in which the company summarized the results of the collaborative and made recommendations that could take place in short order or in the company's next rate filings. Notably, the report recommended a change to the company's TC and IT tariff penalty provisions, as well as the creation of a new non-firm service class for each territory and the resumption of adding new TC customers in the company's next rate filings. 2 months after the report was filed, on November 27, 2018, staff convened a technical conference with Con Edison, National Grid, and other stakeholders to discuss issues related to interruptible service and gather input on the best approach to resolve reliability issues related to both Con Edison and National Grid's interruptible gas service programs. On December 31, 2018, New York City submitted comments that stated the report was a reasonable summary of the TC IT collaborative discussions, but demonstrates that many issues were not resolved and only proposes a process that will permit resolution of all the issues and the next base rate proceedings for the companies. New York City does not support National Grid's request to defer resolution of the non-firm rate design issues to future rate proceedings. Staff has considered the comments received from all parties, including New York City, in written form and verbally at the technical conference held in November 2018. Staff recognizes that providing customers with IT and TC service allows the companies to reduce gas demand during periods of peak usage by offering a reduced delivery rate to those customers who agree to interrupt gas service when demand peaks. This type of demand response service benefits all customers by using the gas distribution system more efficiently, as IT and TC customers utilize the distribution network when the system is free of capacity constraints, but during times of peak demand, remove their usage from the system. Last year, the Commission granted a waiver of KEDNY's tariff and lowered the applicable penalties for certain TC customers that did not interrupt service when requested. In that case, the Commission noted that the limited firm gas transportation capacity downstate had a direct impact on the price of natural gas during the period of very cold weather. Due to the spike in natural gas prices at the time of interruption, the Commission found that the penalty charges indicated by the tariff exceeded the level necessary to ensure future compliance by the affected customers. Likewise, the report came to the same conclusion on the current penalty structure. The draft order approves the report's recommendation to modify the penalty charges applicable to IT and TC customers, which will lower their risk but still provide a strong incentive for these customers to switch to their alternative fuels when required. Prior to the issuance of the rate order, many National Grid IT and TC customers were migrating to firm service. This trend continues. IT and TC customers primarily rely on fuel oil when their use of natural gas is interrupted. IT and TC customers can face difficulty when seeking to replenish their fuel oil during the winter, and alternative fuels like fuel oil emit more greenhouse gases and particulate matter when consumed in place of natural gas. Moreover, while the rate order attempted to correct the price inequity that caused many IT and TC customers to request firm service, the rate order established the ITTC Collaborative to address several issues that support the service, which benefits gas distribution network reliability. The rate order better aligned the pricing of interruptible service, but inequities remain as IT customers nominally have a lower level of service and pay less than TC customers, yet TC customers are interrupted more often than IT customers. Instead of waiting to address the issue in its next base rate proceedings as proposed in the report, the draft order recommends that the Commission direct the companies to move forward with the report's recommendations to establish a new service class for each service territory to align the current pricing and level of service through the tariff filings independent of their next base rate filings in advance of the upcoming 2019-2020 heating season. Those proposed tariffs will be subject to comment from interested parties prior to this Commission taking action on them. The draft order also recommends that National Grid be directed to again allow willing customers to enroll in TC service. This will allow National Grid to serve customers needing gas service without installing the potential additional infrastructure that might be necessary if those customers required firm service. The draft order lifts the restriction now, which will allow the companies to incorporate the demand changes into future capital investment plans and will benefit firm customers. The technical conference held in November 2018 provided a venue to increase all interested parties' understanding of reliability issues associated with TC and IT customers and collaboratively explore ways to provide them as much flexibility as possible, while also maintaining the natural gas distribution system's reliability and integrity for firm customers. At the technical conference, staff proposed several ideas to enhance the visibility of alternative fuel situation during the winter period, to further minimize any potential threat to the health and safety of all customers due to the issues related to on-hand inventory of alternative fuels and non-compliant customers. The Commission recently directed Con Edison to file additional proposed tariff modifications addressing the potential negative impact of interruptible gas service customers failing to stop using gas when directed. The Commission also encouraged Con Edison to work with National Grid on tariff language that can be uniform across both service territories. In an effort to have consistency, the draft order directs National Grid to file proposed modifications to its tariffs that address the same issues from the technical conference asked of Con Edison so that uniformity can be achieved where possible. The draft order directs National Grid to file proposed tariff modifications within 90 days of the date of this order. These proposed tariffs will be subject to comment from interested parties prior to this Commission taking action on them. This concludes my presentation, and my colleagues and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. My take is that these modifications represent a thoughtful and timely and helpful solution, and that they do a good job of balancing customer benefits and risk, as well as system useful signals. I'm going to be supporting this item. Commissioner Sayre.
This is another example of the success of the collaborative process to address very difficult issues, that both technical and policy, by a group of interested parties with divergent positions. As we do in all of these situations, we took the results of the collaborative and put them out for comment, and we're taking a hard look at those results from the viewpoint of the public interest. In this case, staff recommends a number of improvements in the public interest, and I support those changes. I view them as comparatively minor and not as a rejection of the collaborative result. So I commend staff for a good process and a good set of recommendations, and I support the order.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman.
Thanks. I'll be concurring on this item. I want to incorporate by reference my comments that I made as it related to the Con Ed item that dealt with the TC customers as well. I think it was at the December session. I do think that while we're addressing this, we do need to look at it more holistically and how it incorporates in what we're doing with getting access to energy and what it means switching from a TC to firm, back and forth, et cetera, and some of those issues. So I don't think that this it should be the end of the story. I think we should continue and look how it affects and access to that as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that I can support this effort here. It does provide a certain level of reliability, lowers risk. It establishes a powerful incentive through its offering protection with flexibility, and I think that overall it's just a good approach for us to support. So I'll be supportive of it.
Thank you. With that, I will proceed to call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations to approve the proposed tariff revisions and direct further tariff filings as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I concur.
Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote? Aye. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. We will now move to the third item for discussion. Item 201, Case 16M0610, which is in the matter of comprehensive management and operations audits of New York State Electric and Gas Corporation and Rochester Gas and Electric Corporation, presented by Jeff Hogan, Deputy Director, Management and Operations Audit. John DeLoyla, Audit Engagement Director, and Elizabeth Katz-Tuhi, Audit Project Manager, are available for questions. Jeff, please begin.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. The draft order you have before you for case 16M0610 authorizes the issuance of the final report in the Comprehensive Management and Operations Audit of New York State Electric and Gas and Rochester Gas and Electric Corporation. NYSEG and RG&E are affiliates of Avangrid USA. In December 2016, you authorized the issuance of a request for proposal, or RFP, from consultants to conduct these audits. The scope of the audit was primarily focused on the company's construction program planning processes, REV and electric system planning, including outage readiness, and gas system planning and safety. In April 2017, you approved the selection of Overland Consulting to perform the audits. Overland began its audit field work in June 2017. Throughout the remainder of 2017 and into 2018, Overland conducted numerous interviews and asked over 1,200 information requests to gain an understanding of how the companies conduct their business and to identify areas where the companies might be able to improve their processes. This past November, Overland submitted its final report. While Overland found that the companies were generally well run with effective processes in place, they did identify several opportunities for improvement at NYSEG and RG&E. These opportunities are enumerated in the final report's 81 recommendations to the companies. It is important to keep in mind that the final report and its findings are the product of independent consultants and not of staff. It should also be remembered that the audit's findings are limited to the areas covered by the scope of the audit. Our management and operations audits focus on the processes and procedures a utility has in place to run its operations. The consultants bring their expertise to the audit and recommend improvement opportunities. These may be based on best practices that have been observed in other utilities within New York or other jurisdictions or even non-utility companies. It is important to note that the audit is not focused on specific utility performance over certain periods of time. For instance, the scope of the electric outage management portion of this audit reviewed the procedures the utilities have in place to deal with storms and other possible disruptions to service. And while the audit finds several improvement opportunities in this area, which I will go into shortly, the audit was not a review of the company's performance during any actual storm event. In fact, the final report states that the consultants were aware of NYSEG and RG&E's performance during the 2017 and 2018. The consultants were aware that NYSEG and RG&E's performance during the 2017 and 2018 storms was under review by staff investigations, and that readers of the final report should turn to those investigations for insight into how the utilities implemented their outage management procedures. Per the Public Service Law, the core focus of management and operations audits is construction program planning and operational efficiency. This focus is warranted given the capital-intensive nature of our utilities. In previous management and operations audits of NYSEG and RG&E, there were concerns regarding a lack of capital spending controls at the companies. The current audit found that those issues have largely been addressed. There are recommendations in the final report which look to improve management oversight and communication with respect to the prioritization of capital projects. Overland recommends that the companies develop a more robust enterprise-wide system for project and program management. In addition, the final report recommends that more robust written procedures are needed to document why the prioritization of any particular project has changed. One area the audit covers is REV and electric system planning. Overland investigated the company's governance structure supporting the Commission's REV initiatives and found that there was strong support. That said, the final report does recommend that the companies develop a set of indicators to gauge REV demonstration project performance. The final report also recommended that the company should benchmark against REV best practices used by other New York utilities and use this framework to effectively assess and appropriately scale up successful REV demonstration projects. The audit also recommends that the companies should strengthen REV employee engagement activities to promote fundamental knowledge and good decision-making at all levels within the organization. Regarding long-term electric forecasts, the final report states that the companies need to improve the granularity of those long-term electric forecasts. In addition, the report found that the companies should implement a predictive asset maintenance and management system. As I mentioned earlier, Overland assessed the company's management and systematic preparations for outages and other emergency events. During this review, Overland identified several critical improvement opportunities to important functions, including outage and emergency planning, resourcing, and event tracking. Overland found that the companies should perform additional benchmarking and assess industry best practices for defining and resourcing support staff roles. The final report states that supporting staff roles were defined generically and that the lack of clearly defined roles could lead to confusion during activation and could make finding additional resources more difficult during an event. The final report also states that the company should fully complete the Event Activation Process Improvement Initiative. Overland stated that this recommendation should be a priority as activation issues could impact event response, especially in the case of rapidly developing storms. This initiative will implement a new mobilization system that will reduce overlap and confusion in assigning staff. Overland points out that such confusion could lead to delays in resourcing and require additional work to resolve conflicts. The audit also found that the companies need to improve post-event reporting and lessons learned efforts. While the companies do use a spreadsheet tool to track key event data and milestones, the final report points out that there is not a systemized tool to allow robust cross-event comparisons. The other major scope area of the audit where recommendations were made was in regard to gas system planning and safety. Here, Overland reports that the companies have not completed a comprehensive gas strategic plan in recent years and recommends that a plan for 2019 and beyond should be completed. In addition, the final report recommends that a gas senior vice president at the Avangrid Networks level should be added to provide additional executive-level oversight of the gas businesses. With regards to the important topic of gas safety, Overland made several recommendations. One of these was that the companies should prioritize the replacement of all remaining high-pressure bare steel and associated services. Bare steel main and associated services. In addition, the final report recommends that the companies review and enhance their reporting to the federal government. Part of the scope for this audit required Overland to assess the potential costs, risks, and benefits associated with implementation of all of the recommendations made. This type of analysis can be used, along with the company's own estimates, in determining the appropriateness of the utility's proposed plan to implement the recommendations. While Overland provided costs for some of these recommendations, the nature of some of the proposals do not lend themselves to the quantification of benefits. We expect that the benefit cost analysis will be further refined through the implementation phase, as well as being able to use rate case quality data during that phase to make sure that we get the correct focus at that time. The companies have submitted comments regarding the audit. They indicate satisfaction with the audit process and general agreement with the audit results. The companies do note that some of the recommendations have become dated, given the time needed to finalize the report, but state they will provide relevant plans to address all of the recommendations in their forthcoming draft implementation plan filing. The key next step is the filing of a draft implementation plan. The draft order requires the companies to file such a plan within 30 days of the issuance of the order releasing the final report. NYSEG and RG&E will address the implementation of each specific recommendation contained in the audit and address whether they believe the Commission should adopt, reject, or modify, in whole or in part, any recommendations. If the companies are proposing to not implement any particular recommendation, they should give their reasons for opposing the recommendation and any alternative proposal they may have to address the root cause or spirit and intent of the recommendation which they are rejecting. Staff will work closely with the companies in the coming weeks to ensure that the implementation plan that is filed is responsive to the final report and has a realistic timeline for addressing each recommendation. In conclusion, I would like to thank my staff and the subject matter experts from the other offices for their diligent work on this audit over a long period of time. Thank Overland Consulting for their professionalism and expertise throughout the audit, and NYSEG and RG&E for fostering a receptive environment for this audit to take place. That concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, John DeLoya, the Audit's Engagement Director, Betsy Toohey, the Audit's Project Manager, and I will be glad to assist you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. So management and operations audits take a comprehensive look at utilities, at their management and at their operations. And they're an essential element of how we attend to the capacity, to the ability of utilities to serve New Yorkers well. The focus here was appropriate: construction, systems planning, systems readiness. Those are fundamental. And I find that this report is professionally done and timely and delivers on its intended scope. I will be supporting the release of this report and the order of the submission of an implementation plan. Commissioner Sayre.
I agree with the Chair's remarks wholeheartedly. In my view, the Commission's audit process is working well. Every time we go through it, the auditors find significant areas for improvement for utilities to develop better processes. And the vast majority of those recommendations are in fact agreed to and implemented by the utilities. This is another example of that process. In a field as complex as utility service, perfection is not achievable. Continuous improvement, however, is possible and necessary. NYSEG and RG&E know very well that we'll be back again in a few years for another round, and that's okay. In fact, that's good. That's how the process works. I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman?
Thank you. I was really impressed with staff during this audit process. I thought staff worked really well together. I thought staff really worked well at making sure that commissioners had the information, and it really was very good. An audit process is one that should, by its nature, give us information so that we can all improve, whether it's the company or us as the Commission overseeing it. So I think it was really helpful. I am going to vote for it. I did just want to note, two things from the final report is not public yet. Is that correct? And
yes, that is correct. It would be issued with the order, presumably within the next day or so.
Okay, so I won't speak to it, because I do think it's important that the order itself comes out. But I do think it is worth noting that folks look through it carefully rather than just looking at the order as the be-all and end-all, because I do think that it does tell a good story. It does tell a positive story, and where there are improvements to be made. It is also a snapshot in time, and so some of those things already may be in place or going to be in place, or have the dynamics have changed a little bit. So for what it's worth, I do think it is important to point out. One of the things that I was also struck with was some of the thoughtfulness in terms of the auditor focusing on REV, and also, as an aside, some of the focus on the natural gas issues, like the neighborhood gas expansions and the positiveness of how the company was working on that, and also focusing on the non-pipes alternatives, and whether or not there should be a policy at the company in looking at when they should be addressing, and potential non-pipes alternatives should be utilized. I do think that is something that we as a commission, and I've spoken publicly on this, we as a commission have grappled with as well, in terms of what is the standard, so you don't go down that rabbit hole focused on that. But overall, I think it really gave us a lot, and will give the company a lot to work with. So thank you very much, and I really do want to give kudos to staff. So thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Lisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, first of all, thanks for your good work, as always. And I should state that we and the public in general probably sometimes hears nothing but all the bad news about the utilities that provide crucial services to us in the state. So this is one of those times. I think the overview is that it seems to be that these are very well-run companies, at least from the report, with some room for improvement, which you would expect. But it's encouraging, and I think the report is well received. I'll be supporting it.
Thank you. With that, I will proceed to call for a vote. My own vote is in favor of the recommendation to release the audit report and direct the companies to file an implementation plan as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Lisi, how do you vote?
Aye.
The item is approved, and the recommendation is adopted. We will move to the fourth item for discussion. Item 301, Case 18E0138, as it relates to the consensus proposal for direct current fast charging for electric vehicles, presented by Marianne Sorrentino, Acting Chief Electric Rates and Tariffs. Christopher Graves, Principal Economist, and Bridget Wobie, Assistant Counsel, are available for questions. Marianne, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Item 301 is a draft order implementing a per-plug incentive program at each of New York's electric investor-owned utilities. The per-plug incentive program is intended to encourage development of a publicly accessible direct current fast charging, or DCFC, network to support electric vehicle use and adoption. By implementing this program, the Commission is addressing the consensus proposal to encourage statewide deployment of direct current fast charging facilities for EVs filed by Central Hudson, Con Ed, NYSEG, NYPA, the DEC, the DOT, NYSERDA, the Thruway Authority, National Grid, Orange and Rockland, and Rochester Gas and Electric, or the consensus parties. The draft order also addresses the joint petition for immediate and long-term rate relief to encourage statewide deployment of DCFC facilities for EVs filed by NYPA, the DEC, the DOT, and the Thruway Authority, or the joint petitioners. The joint petitioners requested the Commission commence proceeding to establish principles to guide investor-owned utilities in redesigning rates applicable to DCFC accounts. The joint petitioners indicate that the amount of electricity used and the applicable electric tariff are primary drivers of DCFC operating costs, noting that stations take service under service classes that include both demand and energy charge components. The joint petitioners stated that when DCFC station utilization rates are very low, demand charges can account for up to 90% of a station's monthly electricity bill in New York. The joint petitioners therefore requested the Commission direct investor-owned utilities to modify their tariffs to provide immediate relief for DCFC stations. Specifically, the joint petitioners requested that DCFC stations be allowed to qualify for service under a non-demand billed service classification, be exempt from any kilowatt or kilowatt-hour limits that would jeopardize their entitlement to take non-demand billed service, and be provided a one-time opportunity to elect to take service under the applicable demand billed service classification. Shortly after the joint petition was filed, the Commission commenced a proceeding to consider the role of electric utilities in providing infrastructure and rate design options to ensure that the utilities' EV readiness framework can meet the future EV market development and accommodate the needs for electricity demand of electric vehicle supply equipment and infrastructure. The commencement of this proceeding satisfies the joint petitioner's broader request. Staff, in coordination with NYSERDA, convened a technical conference in July of 2018 to consider the various topics outlined by the Commission in its order instituting the proceeding. Rate design was highlighted as a critical issue for DCFC development, and staff hosted a working group meeting to discuss rate design principles on September 21st. At that meeting, Con Edison proposed an annual per-plug incentive program to offset operating costs for DCFC stations. This per-plug incentive was designed to provide a combined benefit in conjunction with the delivery rate discount offered under Con Edison's existing EV quick charging station business incentive rate. After the rate design working group meeting, the joint utilities, NYPA, NYSERDA, the City of New York, the UIU, and Long Island Power Authority collaborated in the development of this consensus proposal. The consensus parties explained that the per-plug incentive program contained in the proposal provides for limited-term cost relief for DCFC stations to address the short-term economic challenges associated with low station utilization levels, and are of appropriate size and scope to encourage the development of DCFC infrastructure in line with supporting the state's ZEV goals of 800,000 ZEV vehicles in New York State by 2025. The consensus parties urged the Commission to approve the proposed incentive program as an appropriate measure that balances the public policy of increasing EV adoption as a tool to support clean energy goals with the interest of maintaining the integrity of cost-based rate design. The per-plug incentive in the draft order adopts many of the provisions contained in the consensus proposal. Specifically, the draft order adopts a per-plug incentive program that is available to 1,074 new publicly available DCFC plugs across the utility service territories. Plugs must have a minimum simultaneous charging capability of 50 kilowatts to qualify for the program. And to incent installation of faster charging plugs, higher incentives are provided to plugs with a minimum simultaneous charging capability of 75 kilowatts. The program lasts for 7 years and provides an annual declining per-plug incentive to DCFC owners that is to be paid after each complete year of electric service. The draft order also addresses some notable differences in the utility-specific programs contained in the consensus proposal. For example, pursuant to the consensus proposal, the Con Ed and Orange and Rockland per-plug incentives were designed to provide a combined benefit in conjunction with delivery rate discounts offered under the business incentive rate and economic development rate, respectively, whereas the other utilities per-plug incentives were designed assuming that DCFC stations will not receive other delivery rate discounts. The Commission approved Con Ed's EV quick charging station program business incentive rate in April of last year. Orange and Rockland does not currently have a similar EDR program, but requests implementing one in the consensus proposal. The draft order rejects Orange and Rockland's EDR proposal and instead adopts a per-plug incentive that is sized to incent development without such a rate discount. The draft order does, however, approve Con Edison's proposals to eliminate the requirement that economic incentives be received from other governmental authorities to qualify for the EV quick charging station component of its BIR, and to broaden the applicability such that governmental entities may qualify for the discount, as such entities will be providing a direct capital investment to build critical infrastructure that will be used to serve the public's charging need. The Con Ed and Orange and Rockland programs in the consensus proposal were also unique in that they contain a separate load factor incentive, whereby station owners would earn a $500 incentive annually for achieving a 5% load factor and $1,500 annually for achieving a 10% load factor. The draft order finds the load factor incentive to be unnecessary at this time, as station owners have a natural incentive to maximize station utilization. In addition to these differences, Con Edison, Orange and Rockland, and Central Hudson propose to provide initial incentives at the maximum value, independent of when a DCFC station qualifies for the program. NYSEG, RG&E, and National Grid, however, tie the initial incentive payment amounts to the year in which the station qualifies for the program. To capture cost savings from potential technology cost declines, the draft order requires that initial incentive amounts be tied to the year in which the station qualifies for the program. The draft order also establishes a cap on incentive payments, such that each station's annual incentive payment cannot exceed the station's total delivery cost for the 12-month billing period for which the incentive is provided, similar to the NYSEG and RG&E proposals. Finally, the utility-specific programs contained in the consensus proposal include a variety of mechanisms to recover the costs associated with incentive payments, such as the use of deferrals, surcharges, and the revenue decoupling mechanism. The draft order provides funding for the incentive programs using a combination of NYSERDA legacy funds and a new surcharge to be assessed to customer groups that did not contribute to such funds. In addition to these modifications, the draft order expands the public accessibility qualification criteria, expands reporting requirements, and establishes an interim review that will allow the Commission to evaluate the success of the program and to make any prudent changes. This concludes my presentation of the draft order. Chris Graves, Bridget Wobie, and I are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Complicated topic, but my take is that the portfolio of actions that the order proposes are practical and smart and timely steps to enable new and needed infrastructure at sensible budgets and at sensible payment structures. And it puts a wide range of partners in a position to invest their money in our agenda for the benefit of all New Yorkers. I'm going to support this item. Commissioner Sayre?
In my view, the increasing electrification of transportation is obviously going to be good for the environment, but I also see it as good for utilities and for customers. For utilities, the additional electricity demand will provide more revenues, and that reduces the burden on utility customers. But EVs, as is well known, have a chicken and an egg problem. Chargers aren't being built because there aren't enough EVs, and EVs aren't being bought because there aren't enough chargers. This item helps us get out of that cycle and also addresses one of the issues of EV adoption, which is the amount of time that it takes to charge vehicles while away from home base. It focuses on high-capacity charging. This order is far from the end of the road of the Commission's consideration of transportation electrification, but it takes us a few good steps in the right direction. I support it.
Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. So just a couple of points. In April, at the April session, I voted in concurrence, voting for this item, the generic proceeding to open this. I did not vote for the Con Ed BIR. I was concerned why we were doing that at the time when we were opening a generic proceeding looking at EVs, and didn't make sense to me. And in light of the fact that there are now significant changes to or modifications to the Con Ed BIR, as well as denial of the O&R BIR filed, as well as folding in the petition, the NYPA petition to this. I didn't think it was prudent at the time in April to be addressing that separately. And so I think in actuality, my decision at that time to say no to that was one that I feel even more comfortable with. I am comfortable with aspects of this. I think staff did a really good job, frankly, of trying to make sure that consumers were protected here, and also trying to weave a fine line on what was appropriate to help jumpstart this market, understanding that we were really putting forth kind of a half loaf, and we still have a lot more to do. I struggle with this item the way I struggled with it back in April at session, and I went back to the April transcript to remind myself if I was correct in, or if my questions to my answers had been alleviated by this item. And some were, but many weren't. The ones that weren't really related to NYPA's role, the utilities role long-term, and the VW settlement and the funding with that. Let's talk first about the VW settlement. Part of my concern, and the reason I'm focused on it, is that while I understand there's a separate track for that, and I'm not looking to get involved in stuff that's outside of our jurisdiction, I don't think it's appropriate nor prudent to do so, to the extent that it complements us and also that our state policies as they affect other state agencies and state parties, and those that are under our jurisdiction are affected. It is extremely important, and it's extremely important that we are complementing each other in a way that makes sense. Here we're talking about taking unencumbered legacy funds that seem to never, ever be ending over at NYSERDA, and utilizing them now for part of this, for the monies here. But there have been a number of different focus points that have been focused on monies from the VW settlement. NYPA's also issued press releases, at least one, on $250 million for electric vehicles, and I think I saw something the other day on some other fast charging stations and things that they're doing. And to the extent that those trip into our jurisdiction, I do think it's important that I fully understand those funding streams, those mechanisms, and exactly what, how they align or don't, how separate they are or not from us. Because one of my sort of focuses is I want to make sure that whatever the pots of money that are getting used are being used in a way that helps to do it in a thoughtful way, in a way that is working, and that at the end of the day we don't say, oh, we didn't use it effectively, we were working at cross purposes, we had a lot of administrative overhead costs that we could have, done differently. And by the way, we were using ratepayer funding when we should have been using maybe some other pot of funding. And to the extent that that is important for me, before we dip into the ratepayer funding. I want to make sure that we're utilizing it. Now, I do understand that some of the Volkswagen settlement funding would be used for other things that are outside of our wheelhouse as it relates to transportation, but you can't really separate a lot of that because it is aligned, some of these initiatives, so it's a little sort of this gray area confusion. So those are some of the questions I was hoping was getting answered when we talked about, and the order talked itself about the white paper that would come out from staff that would address that. So I look at this order more as an interim order, because this order that we're looking at today is looking at that white paper that we talked about in the April order now being done. I don't remember, there's no timeline for that paper, right?
That's correct. There's no specific timeline or due date for staff's white paper.
Okay. I think I might have a sign soon that says no white papers. So the thing for me is that I fear that the failure to know where it will fit will go into the ever-increasing bucket of white papers reports that sometimes will either wind up in other proceedings or drop unexpectedly, or somehow doesn't necessarily get the right attention that it should be, or may wind up, in this case, not getting seen until the interim review process, which isn't until 2023. And I'm concerned about that 2023 review. The reason I'm concerned is this order is really only dealing with the DCFC, right? It's not dealing with the larger make-ready issues, grid integration issues, all of those different sort of issues that I think are percolating, utility ownership issues, which are, I think, needing to be tackled, how it fits in terms of energy planning itself, working with other entities, et cetera, and to the extent that without it being necessarily clearer, especially as it relates to other state agencies and others having some hand in it, I fear that these things will get done without the benefit of the Commission's thought process. And so the white paper may wind up being a compilation of other things being done outside of us having weighed in. And so staff, I really would like to have more of a understanding of exactly what we're asking you to do, in what time, rather than just, okay, take care of doing this because maybe it's just make work that doesn't need to be, or giving more of a leadership in what we as the Commission are looking to do. Because the proceeding itself, when it was done, one of my concerns had been that it was a little bit clunky on exactly what we were asking. And we had a whole host of comments or questions that we were seeking to identify, and we're still kind of working through that. However, what I will say, I do think that as to the DCFC, you have weaved a very good, taken the consensus proposal and weaved a very good modification to it, and have really tried to address that issue in a way that I think makes sense. Now let's look at the concerns I have as it relates to NYPA. NYPA has a lot in this space, not only the $250 million, EV demos, there's been other things. My concern is we don't oversee NYPA, so to the extent that we are also giving them this through the DCFC, I want to see some of the accountability, and this gets to, the larger issue, and I've talked about this before. I do think that, and while we know, we've talked about this, while we know that NYPA does voluntarily agree to be a part of many of our programs, CES, et cetera, and in here, they're going to have to come under the hood and look, because we identify it clearly that they haven't paid and they're going to have to. We do need to look at some of the things that we would be able to get if they were a jurisdictional utility. And I think that is important because it's not enough that they just are captured through the monetary aspect of it, but to the extent that they also are being looked at for this purposes also in being able to give to the commission itself information that we would get also from a utility, especially as we're looking at it in what makes sense as we go into what the role is of the utility, or in this case NYPA and LIPA, frankly. I think it's important. The change to Con Ed's BIR as it relates to, there were three things, substantive changes, including one was the elimination of the government incentive requirement. The second was permitting government participation, and the third was extending the date from December 31st, extending it from December 31st from the current date of April 30th. So the third date is fine. I understand the extension. The two that relate to the elimination of the government incentive requirement and permitting government participation. Can you explain why we're choosing to do those changes?
Yes. So this BIR has been open to electric vehicle quick charging station developers since April, and that market has not materialized. The private developers have not shown up and built these DCFC stations in the numbers that we need them in order to meet our zero emissions vehicle goals. Removing the restrictions really allows site hosts that are providing a direct capital investment by building the critical infrastructure to receive the appropriate incentive to deliver the public good of the DCFC being available. So in terms of government entities being eligible to receive the business incentive rate, those government entities are DCFC station hosts and developers making capital contributions to this public infrastructure.
Okay, so the reason I have concern, or at least pause for concern, is that really means that now it could be that government entities rather than private entities are able to access this. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it may mean that, for example, and it sounds like I'm beating up on NYPA, but I probably am at this point, NYPA could take advantage of that. Now, that would mean to me, I want to have, because I want to have I want them to show, like a private customer, private participant, they would have an incentive. They wouldn't want to participate unless they were actually going to be having a lot of people using them, right? I don't necessarily know if that would be NYPA's incentive. So we want to be able to make sure that they're not just utilizing it in a way that then says, check the box, we've now gotten people to participate, and not necessarily caring. We want to make sure that that connection is there, right? So we also want to make sure that they're not only, I mean, the RAP is in EVgo in this proceeding, I think very eloquently explained what a lot of people's concerns are, rightly or wrongly, is that NYPA does seem to crowd the market in a way that makes them feel that they can't have a role in the market, which is EVgo talked in one of their filings in this proceeding, but that's why they didn't put in an RFP in the JFK item. So here I am looking now at recognizing that we are modifying the Con Ed's BIR to be helpful to government entities, which would include NYPA, LIPA, SUNY, I guess, others. I mean, it's not just them. But in the space, we need to be mindful that we are not necessarily then just making it easy to just go to the government entities to get the participation to be able to show the success versus figuring out what the issue is on the private side. So that's why I just flag that's a concern of mine.
So staff recognizes and appreciates that concern, and one of the goals of the REV is to only step forth when the marketplace has not yet materialized. For these 7-year policy goals, we think it's appropriate to open up the business incentive rate to allow government entity participation. The stations that are built by any government entities will be subject to the same data reporting requirements as the private market participants will be. And so that station data is going to inform future commission action regarding government ownership, and it will help with deciding utility ownership levels as well. So as far as accountability goes, in order to receive the benefit of this incentive program, all participants, whether they be private market developers or a government entity, are subject to the same station data reporting requirements.
Okay, I think that's excellent. Thank you. That's very helpful. And as to the JFK Airport reference, which was EVgo's comments. The only thing I will say is, as to DCFCs, I would really think that they would not be at airports, at least at where folks are going and dropping off their car to get on a plane. It's very different. That to me, you won't want them there. You want charging stations there, but at least in long-term parking, you don't need a fast charging station.
I don't think any developers would disagree with you.
Right. Okay. So just wanted the EVgo comment was really in a more generic process with the EV charging stations in general. So.
Yes, EVgo's comment and NYPA's reply, which are filed in this docket, is not really very specific to the DCFC program incentive that this order recommends.
Right.
It's more about NYPA's RFP process in general.
Yeah, and I think it's well noted, and I think it's something that I think we should take note of, just to the extent that that is something that I think many folks also have a concern about. NYPA itself doesn't want to crowd the market inappropriately, and so therefore we need to be mindful of making sure that we are doing everything to make sure that the market is robust, and need to take a look at that. And it happens in other spaces too. And so it's something for us to consider. Okay, thank you. So I addressed the money issue. I will say we looked at that. We looked at the BIR changes, my concerns, EVgo's concerns on crowding the market, the DC VW settlement issues, the staff white paper, and the interim review process, which I think is too long of a review process. I do know that they're filing annual 60 days reports, but I do think that as to the DCFC, I get that. As to the larger EV issues and what we're doing, especially as it relates overall, I would like to see that. I would believe it would be in other tracks too, but I think it is important for us to consider how that fits and make sure that we're clear about that, especially my mantra on the different proceedings that things seem to pop, and to make sure we're carefully looking at that. I do want to note something, and this is just meant for thoughtful comments, not as criticism on the consensus proposal. I did very carefully look to make sure how the consensus proposal came through. It was during a open working group meeting that was noticed, or stakeholder meeting that was noticed by the parties. Parties were there. It was presented. There was a PowerPoint presentation. Folks got together, did look at it, and it did involve several different stakeholders from the proceeding. However, I do think that we do need to be, and then consensus proposal, when finalized, was submitted, put on DMM, and then 2 days later it was issued for comments by the secretary. I do think that we do need to be mindful of noting for others that flagging that there are discussions among parties, especially when those parties involved state agencies, that they are engaged in discussions that may lead to some joint consensus proposals. We do have processes and regulations in place when we're dealing with settlement discussions, but we don't really have when we're dealing in this particular matter. It was followed, at least to the extent that there was a pathway when looking at it from the open process through the meeting itself. But I do just note that we do need to be mindful. We should take extra precautions, especially when state agencies are involved, and especially when we take up that consensus proposal so quickly after and put it out there and then adopt it with modifications. It is something that I think I would rather play safer rather than loose on the issue. So something I just wanted to flag for folks. Thank you. I will be voting in concurrence with the item. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Lisi. Sorry, I caught you coughing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support this effort. I think it's exciting in a way to look down the road, no pun intended, and see more and more energy-efficient electric vehicles out there. I think the competition will start to become more and more fierce as those that sell and market gasoline-powered engines are going to respond to this. But we have to do it anyways, and then let the marketplace decide. But if you look at what has happened with cell phones, and I know I travel quite a bit, maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, if you're in an airport, you couldn't find a single place where you could plug in your cell phone to charge it. Now they're pretty much everywhere. You go in a coffee shop, you go in a grocery store, you definitely go in mass transit hubs, and there are places to charge your phones literally everywhere. Why is that? Because of the market demanding that opportunity. So if we give this a little bit of a leg up, then the market will probably start to feel more comfortable with the growth of electric vehicles, and this is what will be necessary to help that growth go along. So, of course, I'll support it and look forward to doing more things of this nature that will help us get into the future as we look at our environment as a safe and healthy place to live.
Thank you very much. With that, I will proceed to call for a vote. My own vote is in favor of the recommendation to adopt a consensus proposal with modifications as discussed. Commissioner Sear, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I concur.
Commissioner Lisi, how do you vote?
Aye.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any items on the consent agenda?
No.
Commissioner Berman?
Yes, I am.
You can wait. Sorry.
That's right.
Sorry.
I'm going to be on item 368, concurring on item 562, concurring on item 563. For the sixth time, I will be voting no.
Commissioner Alisi? With that, I will proceed to vote, to call for a vote. My own vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Sayre?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman?
Aye, except for ones I
As
noted.
noted. Thank you. Commissioner Alisi? The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Commissioner Berman, may I give you the floor?
Sure. Thank you so much for letting me speak. As February is Black History Month, I'm honored to have been chosen to make a few comments to recognize an amazing woman I never knew but admire greatly. Her name was Carmel Carrington Marr. Ms. Carrington Marr was a Republican appointed by Rockefeller. She was both the first woman and the first African American appointed as a commissioner of the New York Public Service Commission. She served from 1971 to 1986. She was also the chair of the NARUC Committee on Gas. She sat on numerous committees, including the U.S. Department of Transportation Technical Pipeline Safety Standards Committee and Gas Research Institute Advisory Council. She was an accomplished attorney, civic-minded volunteer, and the beloved mother of 2 boys. She was also the first African-American woman appointed to the permanent staff of the U.S. mission to the United Nations. Ms. Carrington Marr set a high bar for all regulators that continues today. I keep her legacy close to remind me of the true essence of public service. She helped to make my road easier here. I thank her for her dedication to public service, and it's fitting that we honor her on Black History Month. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Thank you very much. It's great to contemplate. It really is. So anticlimactically, I will now call for an adjournment. Thank you very much. Excuse me. Secretary Burgess, is there anything further to come before us?
There is nothing further to come before you today.
Well, with that, I now adjourn. Thank you.